Hello, my name is Samantha Fielding, and this is my presentation for my A3 project, which is improving the process for creating a schedule for the food and beverage department at my work. So the problem that we're seeing is that our schedules often don't accurately represent the staffing needs that we have for the business. So this leads to our outlets being understaffed, our employees being overworked, a decreased morale on the employees that we do have. So when they come in, they know they're going to be overworked, so they don't really care about doing a good job. They kind of just care about getting through the shift. Increased call outs, increased overtime, and essentially increased turnover rates. All these things affect our business negatively and can hinder our ability to deliver an exceptional customer service experience to our customers. This is important because in hospitality, the experience is basically all the customers have to work with. If they're continuously getting bad service, they're not going to come back, and they're going to spread, bad word of mouth to everyone else, and we'll get a reputation of having bad service, which is not what we want. So this is my current state diagram. We can see that we start with the decision to make the schedule. We go ahead and gather forecasting data. This is basically information that tells us where business levels were at last year and gives us the ability to kind of estimate where we think we're going to be for the current scheduling period. We then decide how many shifts are needed for each area that we serve food and beverage out of. We then collect employee availability. This tells us when and what days all of our employees can work, and also includes like PTO and things like that. Then we decide which employees are scheduled when. We create the schedule in Excel. If any edits need to be made, we go ahead and make them, we post it. And if not, then we just go ahead and we post the schedule. So the first type of situational analysis that I performed was the 5 whys. Why are we seeing a lower level of customer satisfaction? Why? Because we're seeing that certain areas of the operation experience more overtime than others. Why? Because those places are understaffed and leading them to be overworked. Why? Because they're understaffed, we're seeing a lot of call-offs. We're losing employees, and we're needing to cover those shifts that have been lost. And we don't actually have enough staff to be able to properly cover each of the areas that we need. Why? We're seeing a pattern of the forecasting data that we're using either being incorrect or just being overlooked completely and just making a schedule without even looking at it. Why? Because the director who makes the schedule has so much on their plate. They have like time constraints on them, and so they don't have time to double check everything or actually go in and use the actual forecasting data itself. So they're just creating a schedule for what they think is going to be the best and hoping that they can make edits later. The next thing that I did was to create a checklist sheet that documents which employees have the most overtime. This will tell us basically which areas need the most attention when it comes to process improvement, which areas need us to pay the most attention to when it comes to scheduling. So we can see that the locker room manager, the sous chef, and the bartender and the server in the locker room are commonly the most that have the most overtime. Therefore, that tells us that the locker room is where we should be paying most attention to when it comes to process improvement and making edits on the schedule, as well as the kitchen. Next, I made a Pareto chart. Me and some coworkers, we went through the process of deciding why we're seeing the most overtime. We can see down at the bottom here that incorrect forecasting data for events, as well as incorrect data for the restaurant can lead to being understaffed. So for events, that would look like the event orders not being up to date and therefore being understaffed for the events, where if we had double checked the information, then we would know that we would actually need more people and people would be working less overtime because we would have more staff available. For the restaurant, it would be similar, where we would schedule more people to come in because business levels are actually higher than expected. We then see call-offs and turnover to be the third and fourth most common reason for overtime. Call-offs, this happens a lot with every operation. It's to be expected. The issue is that we need to be able to have people to call in when we receive those call offs, and then turnover, people are leaving. So we need to make sure that we have those hours covered so that our employees aren't just taking the brunt of that. So the first countermeasure that I decided to focus on for this presentation, because of the limited time we have for the term, was to create a checklist for the process of making the schedule. Hopefully by doing this, we'll be able to error proof. There'll be less errors in the schedule, and then eventually streamline the process to where someone who is new to making the schedule can go through this checklist and make sure that they're completing it, and then they're able to actually create and post the schedule themselves. So the list will include forecasting from last year, estimated levels of business for the current schedule period, event information, employee availability, PTO requests. Then we go back and we just make sure that we're double checking everything so that we make sure that the schedule is as accurate as possible with the information that we currently have. We'll go ahead and then post the schedule. From there, we'll make note of any mistakes that have occurred, why they're occurring, call offs, how many, who's calling off, which positions they're calling off for, overtime, who's the farthest away from the actual times that they're scheduled for. So they're scheduled for a certain amount of hours, but they're going overtime. We're just going to make sure that we're documenting how many hours we're going, who's it happening to, and why is it happening. From there, the next countermeasures that we can do is create an on-call roster of employees, cross-train them to be able to cover any position. We can have the director delegate the task of creating the schedule to a subordinate, or even create an administrative assistant role that can alleviate that task from them. And then the fourth countermeasure would be just to update the process of forecasting data. You know, it could possibly be that the way that we're getting our information for the schedule is not correct, not efficient, not effective. And therefore, we can go ahead and just take a look at that process and see if there are any errors that can be fixed in that, and therefore lead us to make a more accurate schedule in the future. So overall, PDSA cycle, we've got my plan to create and implement the checklist. Hopefully this eliminates errors and streamlines the process for anyone to make the schedule in the future. I conducted a situational analysis using the checklist diagram, the Pareto diagram, and the 5 whys root cause analysis. We're going to see if, for study, we're going to see if, taking the time to slow down and check each piece of data off on the list to avoid errors, avoid extra overtime, and be able to increase our levels of customer service. For ACT, if the checklist doesn't alleviate the issue entirely, then we can go ahead on to countermeasures 2, 3, and 4, which would be to compile that list of on-call employees, get them cross-trained, be able to cover any position. To solve the lack of time, like we said earlier, the director can delegate the task to someone to alleviate any pressure on time constraints that they may have. And then lastly, like I said before as well, just making sure that the process we have for actually collecting our forecasting data, check to see if that needs updating, because if we're consistently seeing errors with the forecasting data, then that might actually be where we're seeing the issue. So this brings us to my future state diagram. Like before, you're going to make the decision to create the schedule. You can then delegate the task to a subordinate or a newly hired administrative assistant. You're going to go ahead and gather the forecasting data. This little bubble below describes what we may need to do to update that process to make sure that that's not where the errors are coming from. We're then going to decide how many shifts we need, collect employee availability, decide which employees are scheduled for when, and then we're going to go ahead and check off all the things on the list to make sure that we have double checked everything. We're going to then create the schedule, decide if edits need to be made. If yes, we're going to make the edits, and then we're going to post the schedule. If not, we're going to post it. When we receive call offs, we're going to call our on-call employees and then make the edits again, and then post the schedule from there. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time.